The gunshot split the morning air like thunder as Katherine Davis sprinted across the dusty Kansas plain, her heart pounding against her ribs as fiercely as her boots against the hard, packed earth. The year was 1876, and she was running for her life away from the plantation where she'd been held as an indentured servant for 5 long years, away from the man who claimed to own her labor but had tried to claim so much more. There she goes, a man's voice bellowed from behind her. Don't let that girl escape. She's got 3 more years on her contract. Katherine ran faster, her lungs burning. The distant line of cottonwoods along the creek bed her only hope. The worn soles of her boots slipped on loose stones as she descended into a shallow gully. 23 years old, and she'd never known true freedom, orphaned at 16, tricked into signing a contract she couldn't read by the Blackwell family who had worked her nearly to death on their sprawling estate. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The bullet kicked up dirt just feet from where she ran. Katherine ducked low, weaving as she ran, praying to God that the next shot wouldn't find her. The creek appeared before her, and she splashed across, water soaking her threadbare skirt. The weight of the fabric dragged at her legs, but she pushed on. The trees were just ahead. If she could make it there, she might have a chance to disappear into the wilderness beyond. She heard horses now, their hooves drumming the earth behind her. Katherine's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she forced herself forward. She'd rather die than go back. The crack of another gunshot echoed, and Katherine felt something tear through her sleeve. She cried out but kept moving. The cottonwoods loomed closer, their leaves dancing in the breeze, promising shelter, promising hope. Just as the horsemen closed in, Katherine plunged into the trees, brambles clawing at her clothes, branches whipping her face. She didn't slow down, didn't look back. Deeper into the woods, she ran until the sounds of pursuit grew distant. Only when her legs finally gave out did Katherine collapse against the broad trunk of an oak tree, her chest heaving, blood trickling from the graze on her arm. She'd made it to the woods, but now what? She had no food, no money, and nowhere to go. As her breathing steadied, Katherine heard the nearby rush of water. Dragging herself to her feet, she staggered toward the sound, finding a clear stream cutting through the forest. Falling to her knees, she cupped her hands and drank deeply, the cool water like life itself flowing down her parched throat. When her thirst was quenched, Katherine sat back on her heels and looked around. She needed to keep moving. Blackwell's men wouldn't give up easily. She was valuable property in their eyes, an investment they wouldn't willingly surrender. Following the stream, Katherine moved carefully, stopping occasionally to listen for pursuers. The woods eventually thinned, and she found herself on the edge of a vast expanse of open prairie, golden in the afternoon sun. Miles of untamed grassland stretched before her, dotted with wildflowers and rolling in the breeze like the ocean she'd only heard stories about. It was the most beautiful sight she'd ever seen. Land that answered to no master, that bloomed and thrived without chains or contracts. Katherine's eyes filled with tears. This was what freedom looked like, but freedom wouldn't feed her. Nor would it protect her from Blackwell's men or the wilderness itself. She needed help, and the only sign of civilization was a thin line of smoke rising from somewhere beyond the next ridge. Katherine steeled herself. It was a risk, but she had no choice. Keeping low, she began making her way across the open prairie toward the smoke. The sun was low in the western sky by the time Katherine crested the ridge. Below her, nestled in a gentle valley, sat a modest homestead. A small cabin with a barn and corral beside it, a kitchen garden, and beyond that, fields of young wheat swaying in the evening breeze. A horse grazed peacefully in a paddock, and chickens pecked in the dirt near the cabin door. Katherine's stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since her meager breakfast before dawn, before she'd made her desperate escape. The homestead looked peaceful, but who knew what kind of people lived there? They might return her to Blackwell for a reward or worse. As she hesitated, the cabin door opened, and a tall figure emerged. A man with broad shoulders, dressed in denims and a faded work shirt, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He carried a bucket toward the well at the side of the house, moving with the easy grace of someone accustomed to physical labor. Katherine ducked lower in the grass, watching. The man drew water from the well, then paused, setting down the bucket. He stood completely still for a moment before turning suddenly, scanning the horizon, looking right toward where she hid. She froze, barely daring to breathe. "I know you're up there." The man's voice carried clearly across the distance. "Been watching the ridge for the past 10 minutes. Might as well come on down." Catherine's heart sank. She could run, but to where? Night was approaching, and she was exhausted, hungry, and hurt. With trembling legs, she stood, raising her hands to show she was unarmed. "I mean no harm," she called back, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Didn't reckon you did," the man replied. "Not many harmful folks announce themselves by standing on ridgelines at sunset. Come on down if you're hungry. Got stew on the fire." Katherine hesitated, then slowly began making her way down the slope toward the cabin. As she drew closer, she could see the man more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-browned skin and a beard that didn't quite hide a strong jawline. When she was within a few yards, he tipped his hat back, revealing eyes the color of the summer sky. "Name's Henry Daniels," he said, studying her with a careful gaze. "And you look like you've had a rough day, madam." "Katherine," she replied, not offering her surname. "Katherine Davis." "And yes, you might say that." Henry's eyes flickered to the bloodstain on her sleeve, and his expression grew serious. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," she said quickly, not wanting pity or questions. "All the same, better let me take a look after we get some food in you." He gestured toward the cabin. "Ladies first." Katherine hesitated once more, wary of entering a stranger's home, especially a man alone. Henry seemed to read her thoughts. "My sister Martha lives here too," he said. "She's gone to town for supplies, won't be back till tomorrow. Door stays open while we eat, if that helps you feel safer." Something in his straightforward manner reassured her. Katherine nodded and cautiously followed him to the cabin, staying alert for any sign of deception. The interior was simple but neat. A table and chairs, a cast iron stove, shelves with a few books, and handmade curtains at the windows. True to his word, a pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the cabin with a rich aroma that made Katherine's empty stomach clench painfully. Henry motioned for her to sit at the table, then ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her, along with a chunk of cornbread. "Eat," he said simply, then turned to pump water into a basin, giving her space. Katherine didn't need to be told twice. She fell upon the food like a starving animal, barely pausing to breathe between bites of the hearty beef and vegetable stew. "Slow down a bit," Henry advised, setting a cup of water beside her bowl. "Food ain't going nowhere." Katherine forced herself to eat more slowly, embarrassed by her lack of manners. When she'd finished, Henry took her bowl and refilled it without comment. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "This is very kind." "Folks ought to help each other out here," he replied with a slight shrug. "West ain't a place to turn away someone in need. Now, how about that arm?" Katherine reluctantly extended her injured arm. Henry gently rolled up her sleeve, revealing the bloody graze where the bullet had torn through flesh without lodging. "Bullet wound," he said matter-of-factly. "Recent too." His blue eyes met hers, questioning but not accusing. Katherine tensed, ready to flee, but Henry just reached for a bottle on a shelf. "Whiskey," he explained. "For cleaning, this'll sting something fierce." He was right. Katherine bit her lip to keep from crying out as he cleaned the wound, then dressed it with a clean strip of cloth. "Thank you," she said again, rolling her sleeve back down. Henry nodded, then sat across from her at the table. "So," he said quietly, "who's hunting you, Miss Davis?" Katherine froze. "What makes you think someone's hunting me?" "Bullet wounds, torn dress, no belongings, looking over your shoulder every few seconds." He raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't born yesterday." For a long moment, Katherine said nothing, weighing her options. This man had shown her kindness, but could she trust him with the truth? "A man named Blackwell," she finally said. "I worked for him. When I tried to leave, he sent men after me." "Worked?" Henry's eyes narrowed slightly. "Or indentured?" Katherine's surprise must have shown on her face because Henry nodded knowingly. "Seen it before," he said grimly. "Eastern gentlemen bringing folks west under contracts that might as well be slavery, working them half to death for years." He leaned forward. "How many years you got left on your papers?" "3, Katherine admitted. "But I'm not going back. I'd rather die." Henry studied her for a long moment. You won't have to do either, he said finally. You can stay here tonight. Martha's room is yours. Tomorrow we'll figure things out. Why would you help me? Katherine asked suspiciously. You don't know me. Like I said, out here we help each other, Henry replied, standing up and stretching. Besides, any fool can see you're running from something bad. I've got no love for men who hunt women with guns. He showed her to a small bedroom with a neatly made bed. My sister's room, he explained. She won't mind. There's a wash basin and towel. I'll be in the main room if you need anything. When he had gone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She was still in danger. Blackwell's men might be searching for her even now, but for the moment, she was safe, fed, and sheltered. Outside the small window, the vast prairie stretched into darkness, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the sky. Fields without chains, she thought, remembering the beauty of the untamed grasslands. She dreamed of such freedom for so long, never truly believing she might find it. Katherine washed as best she could with the basin of water, then lay down on the bed, expecting to stay awake with worry. Instead, exhaustion claimed her immediately, pulling her into the deepest sleep she'd had in years. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, Katherine thought she was back in her tiny room at Blackwell's estate, about to face another day of endless work. Then she remembered the escape, the gunshots, the kind stranger with blue eyes. Katherine rose quickly, smoothing her wrinkled dress as best she could before venturing into the main room. Henry stood at the stove, frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. Morning, he said without turning around. Sleep well. Better than I have in years, Katherine admitted. Thank you again for your hospitality. Henry nodded, sliding eggs into the pan alongside the bacon. Figured you could use a proper breakfast, then we need to talk about what comes next. Over breakfast, Katherine told Henry more about her situation, how she'd been orphaned at 16 when fever took her parents, how Blackwell had offered her a position in his household, presenting her with a contract she couldn't read. She'd signed, desperate and alone, only to discover she'd committed to 8 years of service for room, board, and a pittance of wages. The work was hard, but I could have endured it, she said, staring into her coffee cup. But when his wife died last month, Blackwell started coming to my room at night. She swallowed hard. I barred the door, but I knew it was only a matter of time before. You don't need to say more, Henry said quietly, his jaw tight with anger. You did right to run. But now I have nowhere to go, Katherine said, and they'll be looking for me. The contract gives him the legal right to my labor. If they find me, they'll take me back. Henry was silent for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the table. Finally, he said, what if they couldn't find you? What if Katherine Davis disappeared? Katherine frowned. What do you mean? This is a big country, Henry said. Plenty of places to start fresh with a new name, or, he hesitated, there are other options. Like what? Katherine asked warily. My sister Martha and I, we own this land together, 160 acres under the Homestead Act. We've been working it for 3 years now, got 2 more before it's officially ours. He gestured out the window toward the fields beyond. It's good land, growing wheat mostly, some vegetables, keeping a few animals, but it's a lot of work for just the 2 of us. What are you suggesting? Henry met her eyes directly. Stay, help us work the land. We can't pay much, but you'd have food, shelter, and protection, a place to hide until Blackwell gives up looking. He shrugged. Or longer if you want. Martha's been saying we need another pair of hands. Katherine stared at him in disbelief. You'd risk harboring a runaway. If Blackwell finds me here, you could lose everything. Let me worry about that, Henry said firmly. Besides, contract or not, what he was trying to do to you wasn't right. Some things matter more than papers with signatures. Katherine looked out the window at the fields rippling in the morning breeze. Fields that could be tended by choice, not compulsion. Fields that represented possibility instead of imprisonment. I don't know the first thing about farming, she admitted. Henry smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face. You can learn. We all start somewhere. Before Katherine could respond, they heard the sound of wagon wheels approaching. Henry moved to the window, then relaxed. It's Martha, coming back from town earlier than expected. Katherine tensed as the wagon came to a stop outside. A moment later, the door opened, and a woman entered, tall like Henry, with the same blue eyes, though her hair was a lighter shade of brown, pulled back in a practical braid. She carried a basket of supplies, which she nearly dropped when she saw Katherine. "Well," Martha said, recovering quickly, "seems we have company." Henry quickly explained Katherine's situation, though he was careful to omit the more personal details of Blackwell's threats. Martha listened intently, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Of course you must stay," she said when Henry finished. "At least until we figure out something better. No one should have to go back to a situation like that. I've already offered her work here," Henry added. "We need the help and she needs somewhere to hide." Martha studied Katherine thoughtfully. "Can you cook?" "Yes," Katherine replied, "and sew and clean and tend to gardens. I can learn anything else." "Good," Martha said decisively, "because there's always more work than hands around here." She smiled warmly. "Welcome to our home, Katherine, for as long as you need it." Martha's easy acceptance nearly brought tears to Katherine's eyes. After years of harsh words and harsher treatment, such simple kindness felt foreign. "There's something else," Martha said, her expression growing serious as she turned to Henry. "I heard talk in town, men asking questions about a young woman, dark-haired, traveling alone, offering a reward for information. They're saying she stole valuable items from her employer back east." Katherine gasped. "That's a lie. I took nothing but the clothes on my back." "Of course it's a lie," Henry said grimly. "It's just to give them a reason to search for you that sounds better than the truth." He paced the small room thinking, did they mention her by name or show a likeness? "No likeness," Martha replied, "but they did say they were looking for a Katherine Davis." Henry nodded as if coming to a decision. "Then from now on, you're our cousin Kate from Illinois, come to help with the homestead after losing your husband." He turned to Katherine. "Can you manage that?" Katherine hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I can be Kate." "Good," he said. "We'll need to change your appearance a bit too." "Martha, do you still have that dress pattern you were planning to make?" Martha nodded. "I have fabric too, we can start today." "And your hair," Henry added, studying Katherine. "It's too distinctive the way it is. Might need to cut it, or at least style it differently." "I'll cut it all off if it means my freedom," Katherine said firmly. Henry's eyes softened. "That won't be necessary. Just different enough that you don't match the description they're circulating." By evening, Kate looked markedly different. Martha had helped her fashion a new dress from simple blue cotton, more practical for farm work than her tattered dress from Blackwell's estate. Her long, dark hair, once her pride, had been cut to just below her shoulders and styled simply, with front sections pulled back and pinned. Looking in the small mirror Martha provided, Katherine hardly recognized herself. The frightened servant girl was gone, replaced by someone who might genuinely be a farmer's widow, come west to start anew. "It suits you," Martha said approvingly. "Now let's see what we can do about some proper shoes. Those city boots won't last a week on a farm." The next few days passed in a blur of learning. Katherine had worked hard at Blackwell's estate, but farm work was different at once, more physically demanding and more rewarding. Henry showed her how to tend the kitchen garden, explaining which plants needed more water, which needed thinning, which were ready for harvest. Martha taught her to churn butter, make cheese, and preserve vegetables for the coming winter. Each night, Katherine fell into bed exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment she'd never known before. She was working just as hard as she had at Blackwell's, perhaps harder, but this labor had purpose. She was building something, contributing to a home where she was treated with respect. A week after her arrival, Henry took her to the wheat fields. The golden stalks stood tall in the summer sun, rippling like water when the breeze blew across them. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Henry said, his eyes on the horizon. "First time I saw land like this, I knew I wanted to grow things. To work with the earth instead of against it. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Katherine replied honestly. Henry smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "It'll be ready for harvest soon. Then you'll really see what hard work looks like." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Katherine said. "No," Henry agreed, looking at her with something like admiration. "I don't believe you are." In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared values and common ground. Katherine felt her cheeks warm under his gaze and turned back to the wheat fields. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "How to tend the fields properly, I mean, not just the garden." "Of course," Henry replied, "though it won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Katherine said softly. The days lengthened into weeks, and Katherine fell into the rhythm of farm life. She learned to milk the cow, to collect eggs without disturbing the hens too much, to recognize when vegetables were perfectly ripe. Henry taught her how to repair fences, how to judge the weather from the feel of the air, how to care for the horses. Martha, for her part, became the sister Katherine had never had, sharing stories in the evenings as they mended clothes or preserved food for winter. Katherine learned that the Daniels siblings had come west 4 years earlier after their parents died, determined to build something of their own on the frontier. Henry could have had an easier life, Martha confided one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. He had prospects back east, apprenticed to a fine cabinet maker. Could have had his own shop by now. But when our parents died and I had nowhere to go, he gave it all up to bring me west where we could make our own way together. "He's a good man," Katherine said, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Martha gave her a knowing look. "One of the best, stubborn as a mule sometimes, but his heart's always in the right place." Katherine ducked her head, focusing on the peas. She couldn't deny that her feelings for Henry had grown beyond gratitude. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, all of it had worked its way into her heart. But she kept these feelings carefully guarded. Henry had offered her shelter and work, not courtship, and she wouldn't presume more. The wheat harvest came as August turned the prairie golden brown. It was backbreaking work, even with the three of them sharing the burden. They rose before dawn and worked until dusk, cutting, bundling, and threshing. Katherine's hands blistered, then calloused. Her muscles ached, then strengthened. On the third day of harvest, clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening rain that could ruin the cut wheat before they could get it under cover. "We need to work faster," Henry said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Storm's coming." They redoubled their efforts, racing against the darkening sky. Katherine's arms felt like lead, but she pushed on, determined not to let the Daniels crop be ruined on her account. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, they loaded the last of the bundled wheat onto the wagon. Henry urged the horses toward the barn, while Katherine and Martha hurried behind. They were halfway there when the skies opened. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching them instantly. Martha shrieked, half laughing as she ran for cover. Katherine followed, her sodden dress hampering her movement. Suddenly, Henry was beside her. Without warning, he swept her off her feet and into his arms, carrying her the rest of the way to the barn. "Can't have you slipping in the mud," he explained as he set her down inside, but his eyes told a different story, one that made Katherine's heart race. For a moment they stood there, rain dripping from their clothes, staring at each other. Then Martha cleared her throat and the moment broke. "Let's get this wheat under cover," she said, a smile playing at her lips as she glanced between them. They worked together to unload the wagon, spreading the wheat bundles to dry. By the time they finished, the storm had passed, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a brilliant rainbow arching across the eastern sky. Henry pointed to it as they walked back to the cabin. "Good omen," he said. "Rainbow after a harvest storm means prosperity ahead." "Is that so?" Katherine asked, smiling up at him. "Well, that's what my father always said," Henry admitted with a chuckle. "Might just be a farmer's superstition." "I like it," Katherine decided. "I choose to believe it." That evening, after supper was cleared away, Martha announced she was going to bed early, exhausted from the harvest work. She gave Katherine a meaningful look as she left, making Katherine wonder if her growing feelings for Henry were more obvious than she'd thought. Left alone in the main room, Katherine and Henry sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the gentle patter of lingering raindrops on the roof. "You did well today," Henry said finally. "Not many city folks could have kept up the way you did." "I'm not city folk anymore," Katherine replied, finding she meant it. The woman who had arrived on their doorstep 2 months ago felt like a stranger, now frightened, unsure, defined by what she was running from rather than what she was running toward. Henry smiled at that. "No, I suppose you're not." He hesitated, then added, "It suits you, this life. Almost like you were meant for it. I feel that way too sometimes, Katherine admitted. When I'm working in the garden or helping with the animals, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has. Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt a jolt of connection so strong it nearly took her breath away. There was something in Henry's gaze, a question, perhaps, or a possibility. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Then Henry cleared his throat and stood. I should check on the animals before turning in, he said. Make sure everything's secure after the storm. Of course, Katherine replied, trying not to show her disappointment. Good night, Henry. Good night, Kate, he responded, using the name she now answered to. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sweet dreams. That night, Katherine dreamed of wheat fields stretching to the horizon, of a home that was truly hers, and of blue eyes that looked at her with something more than kindness. The weeks after harvest were busy with preserving the bounty of their garden and preparing for winter. Katherine learned to can vegetables, to dry fruits, to smoke meat. She helped Henry repair the cabin roof and chop firewood. Each day brought new skills, new confidence, and a deepening sense of belonging. September brought the first hint of autumn chill to the mornings. Katherine rose early, as had become her habit, to light the stove and start breakfast before Henry and Martha woke. She was kneading dough for bread when Henry appeared, already dressed for the day's work. Morning, he said, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd brewed. Thought I'd ride into town today. We need supplies and I want to hear if there's any news. Katherine nodded, trying not to show her anxiety. Every trip to town carried the risk of hearing that Blackwell's men were still searching, still asking questions. So far, the news had always been the same. The men had moved on, following false leads further west. Want company. She offered, surprising herself. She hadn't left the homestead since her arrival, too afraid of being recognized. Henry raised his eyebrows. You sure that's wise? Probably not, Katherine admitted, but I can't hide forever, and I'm curious to see the town you've described. Henry considered this, sipping his coffee. It might actually be good, he decided. If people see you as part of our family, living openly, it'll reinforce your story, make it less likely anyone would connect you to a runaway from back east. So it was decided. After breakfast, Katherine put on her newest dress, a simple brown calico Martha had helped her make, and pinned her hair carefully under a bonnet. She barely resembled the frightened woman who had fled Blackwell's estate, but still her heart pounded as Henry helped her into the wagon. You'll be fine, he assured her, seeming to sense her nervousness. Just remember, you're Kate Daniels, my cousin from Illinois, widowed and come west to start fresh. Kate Daniels, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt right somehow, this new identity she'd grown into. The town of Willow Creek was small but bustling. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, the railroad depot at the other. People moved about their business, nodding greetings to Henry as he guided the wagon to a hitching post outside the general store. Daniels, a booming voice called as Henry helped Katherine down from the wagon. Haven't seen you in town for weeks. A burly man with an impressive mustache approached, clapping Henry on the shoulder before turning curious eyes to Katherine. Sheriff Johnson, Henry said with a nod. Been busy with the harvest. This here's my cousin Kate from Illinois. She's come to help us with the homestead. The sheriff tipped his hat politely. Madam, welcome to Willow Creek. Sorry about your husband. Henry mentioned you were recently widowed. Katherine forced a sad smile. Thank you, Sheriff. It's been difficult, but my cousins have been very kind to take me in. Good people, the Daniels, the sheriff agreed. Well, I'll let you get to your shopping. Good to see you, Henry, madam. With another tip of his hat, he continued down the street. You did well, Henry murmured as they entered the store. Now let's make this quick. The less time in public, the better, at least for now. They moved efficiently through the store, gathering the supplies on Martha's list. The shopkeeper was friendly, but not overly curious, accepting Henry's brief introduction of Katherine without much comment. As they were paying for their purchases, the shop door opened, and a well-dressed couple entered, the woman in a fashionable traveling suit, the man in a dark coat that spoke of Eastern wealth. Katherine instinctively turned away, arranging her features into a neutral expression as she pretended to examine a bolt of fabric. Her heart hammered in her chest. They weren't Blackwell's men, but they were clearly the type to move in his social circles. "Just passing through," the shopkeeper was saying to them. "On your way to Denver, you said?" "Yes," the woman replied in a cultured accent. "Though I must say these western towns are also primitive. I shall be glad to reach civilization again." "You might find, madam, that civilization is as much about people as it is about buildings," Henry said casually, counting out coins on the counter. "Some of the most civilized folks I know live in cabins." The woman looked affronted, but her husband chuckled. "Well said, sir. My wife is new to travel outside Boston. She'll learn that the West has its own kind of refinement." Henry nodded politely, then turned to Katherine. "Ready, cousin? Martha will be wondering what's keeping us." Katherine nodded, keeping her face averted from the newcomers as Henry gathered their purchases. Outside, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was close," she whispered as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. "Nothing to worry about," Henry assured her. "Just some travelers passing through. They won't remember us tomorrow." But the encounter had rattled Katherine, reminding her that danger could appear at any moment, that her safety depended on maintaining a deception. As they drove back to the homestead, Henry seemed to sense her unease. "You know," he said conversationally, "in another year we'll have proved up on our claim. The land will be ours free and clear." "That's wonderful," Katherine said, genuinely happy for him and Martha. "Yes," Henry agreed. "It's what we've worked for, but lately I've been thinking. What then?" "Martha talks sometimes of going back east to teach school. She was trained for it before our parents died." "She'd make a wonderful teacher," Katherine said. "But what would happen to the homestead if she left?" Henry glanced at her, then back at the road. "That's what I've been wondering. It's a lot of work for one person, unless—" He fell silent, focusing intently on guiding the horses around a rut in the road. "Unless what?" Katherine prompted. Henry cleared his throat. "Unless that one person wasn't alone." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. "I'm sure Martha wouldn't leave until you found someone to help," she said carefully, not daring to hope he meant what she thought he might. Henry gave her a look that was equal parts exasperation and affection. "Kate," he said quietly, using the name that had become hers in truth as well as fiction. "I'm not talking about hiring help." The wagon crested a hill, and their homestead came into view in the distance, the cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, the barn, the fields they'd harvested together. It looked like a painting, like something from a dream. "What are you talking about then?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I'm talking about a partnership, a life built together." He took a deep breath. "I'm not a man for flowery words, Kate, but these past months, watching you build a new life, seeing your strength and your kindness, it's made me think about building a future, one that includes you if you'd want that." Katherine stared at him, her heart racing. "Henry, are you proposing to me?" "Not very well, apparently," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But yes, I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife. Not right away," he added hastily. "There's still the danger from Blackwell to consider, but someday when it's safe. When the land is ours and you're truly free." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to answer now," Henry said gently. "It's a big decision, and I know your experiences might make you wary of binding yourself to anyone in any way. I'd understand if—" "Yes," Katherine interrupted, the word bursting from her like a long-held breath finally released. "The answer is yes, not someday now, today, tomorrow, whenever you want." Henry's face broke into a smile so radiant it rivaled the sun overhead. He reached for her hands, holding them between his own. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated because of what Martha and I have done for you." "Obligated," Katherine laughed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Henry Daniels, I've been falling in love with you since the day you cleaned my bullet wound and offered me stew. This has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with who you are, who we are together." Henry's eyes darkened with emotion. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, questioning at first, then deepening as Katherine responded, her hands rising to rest against his chest. When they finally broke apart, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Kate," he said simply. "I want to build a life with you, not one where you work for me, but one where we work together, side by side, equal partners in everything." "That's all I've ever wanted," Katherine whispered, "a chance to choose my own path. To work fields that aren't bound by chains." Henry kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. "Then that's what we'll build together." They drove the rest of the way home hand in hand, the future stretching before them like the vast prairie full of challenge and promise, wild and free. Martha, of course, was thrilled by the news. "It's about time," she exclaimed, embracing Katherine warmly. "I've been watching you two dance around each other for months." Plans were made for a small wedding in the spring, after the danger from Blackwell had hopefully passed. But fate, as it often does, had other ideas. 2 weeks later, as the first frost silvered the prairie grass, a rider approached the homestead. Henry was mending the barn door when he spotted the distant figure, and he immediately called for Katherine to go inside. "Stay with Martha," he instructed, his expression grim as he reached for the rifle that always hung by the door. Could be nothing, but better safe than sorry. Katherine obeyed, her heart in her throat as she watched through the window. The rider approached slowly, hands clearly visible, not the aggressive approach of someone hunting a fugitive. As he drew closer, Katherine could see he wore the uniform of a United States Marshal. Henry met the man in the yard, rifle lowered but ready. They spoke for several minutes, too far for Katherine to hear. Then, to her surprise, Henry gestured toward the cabin, inviting the Marshal inside. "It's all right," Henry said as he opened the door. "This is Marshal Williams. He has news you'll want to hear, Kate." The Marshal removed his hat as he entered, nodding respectfully to both women. "Mrs. Daniels," he said to Martha, then turned to Katherine, "and you must be Miss Katherine Davis." Katherine tensed, ready to deny it, but Henry placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he repeated. "The Marshal isn't here to arrest you." "No, madam, I certainly am not," the Marshal confirmed. "I'm here because of Theodore Blackwell." "What about him?" Katherine asked, her voice barely audible. "He's dead, madam," the Marshal said bluntly. "Killed in a saloon brawl in Kansas City 3 weeks ago. Apparently accused the wrong man of cheating at cards." Katherine sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "Dead, are you certain?" "Yes, madam, identified by multiple witnesses." "I've been tracking down people he might have wronged, to let them know they're no longer in danger." The Marshal's eyes were kind. "Your name was in his papers, a contract of indenture with some disturbing additional notes." Katherine closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden removal of the fear that had shadowed her for months. "So I'm free, truly free." "The contract died with him," the Marshal confirmed. "Even if it hadn't, from what I've seen, it wouldn't have held up in court. Looked more like slavery than legal indenture to me." Henry's hand tightened on Katherine's shoulder. "Thank you for bringing this news, Marshal. Will you stay for dinner? It's the least we can offer." The Marshal accepted gratefully, and over a simple but hearty meal, he shared more details about Blackwell's demise and the subsequent investigation that had led him to Katherine. "From what I can gather," he said, "you weren't the first young woman he tried to trap this way. Just the first who got away before." He glanced uncomfortably at Martha. "Well, before things got worse." "I was fortunate," Katherine said, looking at Henry with undisguised love. "I found good people who helped me when I needed it most." After the Marshal departed the next morning with promises to send Katherine's formal release papers once they were processed, Henry found her standing in the wheat field, now stubbled and golden in the autumn light. "How does it feel?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "To be officially free?" Katherine considered the question, gazing out over the land they had tended together. "Honestly, not as different as I expected, because I've felt free here for a long time now. Free to work, free to learn, free to love." She turned to face him. "You gave me that, Henry, you and Martha." Henry shook his head. "We just gave you a safe place to land. You built your freedom yourself with every choice you made, every skill you learned." He took her hands in his. "So what now? With the danger gone, we don't have to wait for spring to marry unless you want to." Katherine smiled, squeezing his hands. "I don't want to wait another day, but I do want to do it properly. A real wedding with Martha's help. Maybe in the church in town, whatever you want, Henry agreed. Though I have to warn you, once word gets out that I'm finally getting married, the whole county will want to attend. I've been the subject of matchmaking attempts for years. Katherine laughed, delighted by this image. I can believe it. Handsome, hard-working farmer with his own land. You're quite the catch, Mr. Daniels. And yet, he said, pulling her closer, I'm the one who got caught. He kissed her softly, then more deeply, his arms encircling her waist. When they broke apart, Katherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Can we plant something here? She asked suddenly. Right in this spot. Henry looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. What did you have in mind? An apple tree, Katherine decided. Something that will grow with us, bear fruit for years to come, a symbol of the roots we're putting down together. An apple tree it is, Henry agreed. We'll plant it right after the wedding. They were married on a crisp October morning, with the prairie ablaze in autumn colors. The little church in Willow Creek was indeed packed, not just with neighbors curious about Henry's bride, but with people who had genuinely come to care for Kate Daniels during her brief appearances in town. Martha had helped Katherine sew a simple but beautiful wedding dress of cream-colored cotton with lace trim salvaged from an old tablecloth. She carried wildflowers gathered from the prairie that morning and wore her hair loose around her shoulders, the way Henry had once mentioned he liked it. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Mrs. Daniels, he whispered against her lips. For real this time, Katherine whispered back. The celebration continued at their homestead, where neighbors had helped set up tables in the yard. There was food and music and dancing until well after sunset. Katherine moved through it all in a daze of happiness, scarcely able to believe that this was now her life surrounded by friends, married to a man she adored, with a future stretching before her as wide and promising as the prairie itself. As the last guests departed, Henry found her sitting on the porch steps, gazing up at the stars. Happy, he asked, settling beside her. More than I ever thought possible, Katherine replied honestly. The next day, true to his word, Henry helped Katherine plant an apple sapling in the spot she had chosen, at the edge of the wheat field where they had first begun to fall in love. May it grow strong and true, Henry said, patting the soil around the slender trunk. Like us. Like us, Katherine echoed, reaching for his hand. The years that followed brought challenges, as all years do. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were times when crops failed and money was tight. Martha did eventually move east to teach, though she returned for extended visits each summer, bringing books and stories of city life that entranced the children who gradually filled the Daniels household. First came Emily, born on a stormy spring night just a year after their wedding. Then Thomas, arriving during the worst blizzard in living memory, forcing Henry to deliver his own son while the midwife was stranded in town. Finally, little Sarah, their surprise baby, born when Katherine was nearly 40 and thought her family complete. Through it all, the land sustained them. The wheat fields grew and flourished under their care. The kitchen garden expanded. The apple tree by the field matured and began bearing fruit, first a handful of small apples, then bushels enough to make pies and preserves to last through winter. They added rooms to the cabin as the family grew, built a proper barn, dug a new well. The railroad brought more settlers, and the town of Willow Creek grew too, sprouting a school, a proper doctor's office, more stores. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between the bustle of daily life, Katherine would stand in her fields, for they were truly hers now, not just legally, but in every way that mattered, and marvel at the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened girl running for her life to a woman surrounded by love, rooted in the land she tended by choice, not compulsion, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Henry surprised her with a gift, a small brass plaque to hang beside their door. It read simply, Davis Daniels Homestead, EST. 1876. I thought it was time we acknowledged both parts of who we are, he explained when Katherine looked at him questioningly. You'll always be Kate to me, but Katherine Davis was brave enough to run toward freedom, and that deserves to be remembered too. Katherine traced the letters with her finger, tears welling in her eyes. "I love you, Henry Daniels," she said. "More today than the day we married, which I wouldn't have thought possible then." "And I love you," he replied, the lines around his eyes crinkling as he smiled, his hair now streaked with silver but his gaze as warm as ever. "My brave, beautiful Kate, who dreamed of fields without chains and made that dream real for both of us." That night, lying beside him in the bed they'd shared for 2 decades, Katherine thought about the incredible journey of her life. She had run from captivity into the unknown, desperate and afraid. She had found not just safety but purpose, not just work but fulfillment, not just a protector but a partner. The fields that surrounded their home were the physical manifestation of what they had built together, a life rooted in choice and mutual respect, bearing fruit season after season, sustaining not just their bodies but their souls. "What are you thinking about?" Henry murmured, his arm tightening around her waist. "About how strange life is," Katherine replied softly. "How the worst day of my life, running from Blackwell with bullets flying past me, led me directly to the best life I could have imagined." Henry kissed her temple. "That's the thing about fields," he said thoughtfully. "What looks like barren ground in one season becomes fertile soil in the next, if you know how to tend it right." Katherine smiled in the darkness. "And we do know how to tend our fields, don't we?" "That we do, my love," Henry agreed. "That we do." Outside their window, the prairie stretched vast and peaceful under the moonlight. The wheat fields slumbered, gathering strength for spring's renewal. The apple tree stood sentinel, its branches etched against the star-filled sky, a living testament to dreams realized, to a freedom found not in escape but in the courage to put down roots, to tend the fertile soil of a life chosen, not imposed. And in that moment, Katherine knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found what all humans seek. Not just freedom from chains, but the freedom to build, to grow, to love. Fields to tend that were truly her own.